What is up, beautiful people? It is I, Ginger from Ginger Fusion, and also now Checkmate Fusion. I am talking about my deck. I got second place finally after two embarrassing top nines. So it felt good to finally win a serial. We're going to talk quickly about the deck, but there's not a lot to talk about because 99% of this deck builds itself. If you guys don't know, the leader Brawly is very simple. He does two things. First of all, he lets you take a life during your turn and give himself critical. This is only really relevant because you need to be at 4 or less life to awaken, and you need to do that as quick as possible, usually turn 2. And the second ability is he lets you search your deck one time in the entire game to search out for a extra, and as long as you're not unlucky and this is in your life, that's usually your target right here, Planet Bamba. What makes this deck so unique is that this is, I think, before we used to have cards, like a lot of cards that just put something into play, because it clearly meant to just put this Bampa into play, like at the start of the game, or like, some sort of mechanic like that. It would have been nice. But at least this way you do have to spend one, so it made it more fair back in the day. Um, let's see. 99% of this deck you can't really mess with. So the core is right here. This guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, this, and this. Now, basically, I just said the entire deck. So one of the most annoying parts about this deck is there's not a lot of going to be divergent and changes because basically it's just a Brawly deck. But in my list, you're going to see two major mistakes I made. And every single game, I had to sideboard these cards out. So the first thing I did was I ran 4 copies of this critical swap. You only run 1 copy of this card because it's pretty much terrible now. It got replaced with this amazing TP. This TP is insane because it lets you go ahead and swap into your, when you swap into it, your leader gets to get untapped, which means you get another critical swing, which is like the best part about him being awoken. So early game, you usually just do that because effectively then you're swapping and you get to just draw a card. You're not too worried in the early game about doing anything else. And the best part about that is, this Brawly, although it does make your opponent get rid of a card, your opponent's probably going to get rid of more cards if they're going to try to prevent this critical damage. The important thing is these 3 came out. I brought in 2 Kales and a testing opposition. And then I always brought out 1 Brawly Youth as the other one for the other testing the opposition. Frequently, the other card I would do is take out a Brawly Surging Attack and bring in a Yamcha, and that was terrible. This deck should run for testing the opposition's main. I don't know what to cut yet, but it's going to be somewhere in that realm because I found that a lot of the cards I was running were terrible. One other thing to keep in mind is King Vegeta's Imposing Presence is terrible. You just run a single copy of Wolfang Fist instead, and you'll probably have a way better tournament because never did I use King Vegeta's Imposing Presence to matter. The only thing cool about it is, it is free to cast, but it doesn't really do anything. What makes this deck so good is there's a lot of synergy and there's a lot of like cool little shenanigans, I'm going to call it, that you get to pull off. The biggest thing being is that on your turn 2, you need to play a unison. If you don't have anything else to do, you can always try delaying it on 1. My last round opponent did not know how good my unison was and tried a different strategy, which almost worked out well for him because I was missing my 1-drop and I didn't have Planet Vampa. But my Piccolo Jr. had 3 markers by the end of my turn. The reason why is if you go second, you can choose to take a life. And if you play Piccolo during your turn, I upticked it, which is this +1 right here. It says choose one of your opponent's battle cards, give it -5, which I did. Killed his blocker, the only one he had. And then when I swung with my leader, I comboed a random card from my hand. I don't remember what it was, probably a Paragus 1-drop. And when I did that, he chose to take the damage. As a result, this Piccolo went to 3 markers. It wasn't a big deal. But what made it really cool was then, because he was playing Goku Green, his next turn, he swung with his leader. He put in a Z energy, and then he played his Z leader, Z Unison, and then he awoke. Well, when he awoke, he went to it. It triggered this ability as well because it doesn't say during your turn. It says either player's turn. So if your opponent chooses to take their own life, you get a free marker. Well, that meant my Piccolo Jr. started the game with 4 markers, effectively. Then he swung into my leader twice. He gave me my missing card so I could get my swap engine going. And then I swapped into my 4-drop. When I swapped into my 4-drop, I think I swung with like my leader or something. And between that and the fact he didn't have dormant, it meant that my Piccolo Jr. From these effects, this 4-drop right here is the big deal. He comes into play, your opponent warps a card, which is pretty good by itself, but then you get to give your unison a marker. So that put it at 5 markers, and then because he took a damage, it went to 6. Well, that means I was able to use the activate main, and that's kind of what you're always trying to do. This is how you win just a crazy amount of your games. And the reason why you win is that you then get to special summon 2 cards from your deck. You almost always want to grab a Fearless Pan and a Rampaging Son Goku. What's really cool is if you do draw these cards and you can't put them at the bottom of your deck with your super combo for any reason, like you don't draw any, you can also play them from your hand. But obviously, if you can, we want to put them to the bottom of the deck. So that's why we run this super combo. Same thing with Ba. If you ever draw an extra Ba, you just save it. And like on turn 2, when you use a super combo up, you're going to go ahead and put that Ba at the bottom of the deck. So that way on turn 3, you can use it. But what was really cool about this Piccolo was my opponent, was already tapped out because he, spent all of his energy. He made a blocker, and so I just went into the ult. I played my Fearless Pan and Rampaging Son Goku. This then had double strike, and it was a 20k base. That also meant my leader, who is critical, also was a 20k base, and then gains a 5k when he swung. So I was able to swing with like my critical guy. I don't remember if he comboed out of it or not because it didn't really matter. Then I swung with my leader. He discarded more cards to get out of that attack. I think I swung with my 4-drop into his unison just to like use it. Then I swapped into my 5-drop. When I swapped into my 5-drop, I got to restand my leader. He still has double strike, still will gain critical. He swung into his leader again. He took it. And then my 5-drop like killed off his unison. And then I used Son Goku's ability, KO'd the 5-drop. It triggered my leader ability. And this is the coolest part about the deck. If your opponent kills any of your Brawlies from any effect, whether that's bottom, KO, negs it to 0, does any effect that makes it leave play, even if they steal control of your Brawly, if it leaves your battle area, you can special summon any Brawly with a 4 or less from your hand just by discarding a card. So it also triggers, though, when one of your cards is KO'd. The part that makes this combo so deadly is that this card right here says you can burst 3 and KO one of your cards. And then this card gets to go into active mode. So effectively, this card becomes dual attack, double strike. But what makes it even better is then I KO this 5-drop and resummon another 4-drop, warping another card from my opponent, and I get another attack as a 20k, all for the low cost of just 1 card from my hand. So between my 2 energy and my energy marker, I was able to kill my opponent on turn 2 for the very last round and get 2nd place, which was like probably my favorite thing to do. Had he attacked Piccolo Jr., I still could have done it, but it wouldn't have been as easy because I would have had to play another card before I went into the Piccolo Jr. It just made it a little bit easier that he chose to awaken and then he ignored my unison. Ironically, some of my harder games were because people did ignore my unison. If you're Pan, if you're Vegito, if you're Cell, pretty much all those decks, if you ignore my unison, that's fine because you have ways of dealing with the cards I play. And so you're not too afraid of the ult even. They can play Supreme, it's like a Kamehameha, whatever it's called, the black card. Some of them play the counter plays. So if you have a way of dealing with the Piccolo Jr., you let me kind of spend resources on this, and then when I go to play a card, you're just like, no. But yeah, it was fun to play the deck. I will say this. Anyone can play this deck, not very hard to do. It's a very simple strategy. It's kind of why I like it. I'm sick of trying so hard in tournaments and trying to come up with all these clever things, and I feel like it's easier not to make mistakes if you play something simple, and this is definitely simple. All of your cards tell you exactly what to do, and they're all pretty much the same thing. And a lot of the cards work together. So like your 1-drop being your best card, this Brawly, you take a life, you crit a life when you play it, and you search out for a Ba by doing so. Well, then Ba says you can add any Brawly that costs 5 or less to your hand. So whatever part of the swap chain you're missing, you get to put in your hand. One of my favorite plays to do lately is actually been do Planet Vampa, play a Brawly, like, you know, a hidden potential, go down to 6 life, and then if swing with like the surging attack into like one of their cards that they have a unison or like their leader with critical. But then if I swap into this card, it still triggers all the other abilities. It says when this card is played, you can't play copies of this card for the turn. Um, and you get to choose one. So you get to, you know, just become this badass card and then you're effectively paying nothing for it, which is really nice. You can also purposely like one of your turns keep your 1-drop up and then pass turn and then go into the surging attack the following turn, then activate Vampa. There's a lot of like little tricks you can do. The big thing to keep in mind though is I realize there's one big mistake. This pan is terrible. It's only relevant on turn 2. You never worry about defending. I'm pretty sure this should be a bursting rage. And the reason why it should be a bursting rage is there were several times where I had nothing else I could charge, and I actually wished I could just charge pan. You have some very small hand sizes, and you can't afford to miss any of your charges, obviously. And at one point, I actually had to charge it was against Cell. I had to charge one of my 5-drops, and then I was short a 5-drop, and it was because I would have rather have gotten rid of my pan, which I never played. Like it doesn't do anything. The cool part about Bursting Rage is, although there isn't a Z leader for Brawly, you don't mind just being like on turn 1. You could just give your leader plus 20 just to make sure that they take that critical damage, you know, in the early game, and you draw a card. Or just defending is the big thing is you frequently will finish your turn at 6 life on turn 1. That means that if your opponent is got to go first, they're probably going to be pretty aggressive. Some of the decks, like the SS4 Vegito deck, and some of the other stuff, it has a lot of double strike. It has a lot of innate abilities that are problems for you. People will frequently try to like double strike you from 5 to 3, or like U7. That's always what they do, right? Well, if you don't have a test in the opposition, you're going to end up taking that attack, or you'd have to combo a ton of cards from your hand. Bursting will let you get out of that attack because it's a plus 20k. And that's what the deck is missing. So that's the biggest change I do here. Your Z deck is largely not to be used. You are only using the Z deck when you make a mistake. I found that there wasn't much I could do with any of these cards. None of them were really relevant. Like this Whis here is supposed to be something you could play in theory, but I never had the energy to do it or a reason to. Same with SSB Vegeta. You never have the 2Z energy that early in the game where this could be a useful card. And then, so you're just kind of like, you know, you're wondering what to do, and you don't generate enough Z deck energy in the deck. So if you can figure out how to fix that problem in the deck, if there's a way to combo with any like Saiyans for free, that would make this deck way better, and you would probably knock it up to being tier 1. I think it's a solid tier 1.5 right now. It's a good deck, but it's got some issues. Basically, if any of your opponents disrupt any of your Brawlies, you die. So if they prevent them from coming into play, you die. If they kill too many of them, you die. If they floodgate you, you die. So just keep it in mind is that you're basically just hoping that your opponent doesn't have any answers. And if they don't, you just can like rapidly kill them before they can set up a defense. This is aggro incarnate, and it's not bad. I don't think this is something I'm going to play long term. I like the idea of it. I want it to be playable. Even saying it, you can tell my body is just like, oh, I don't think I want to play it. It was really rough. I really also don't recommend playing it for webcam. I didn't expect it to be such an issue because for me, I played this deck, right? This is one of my favorite decks back in the day. Well, I forgot how long it's been. We've been playing a lot of other sets since this deck came out. As a result, most people don't know what the cards do. So you're reading every single card over and over again and to each of your opponents, and it just creates a kind of like a bad environment. So playing something more mainstream could be better for a webcam. But it's fun. I'd say it's probably the number 1 aggro deck besides Sapion. The difference is this deck has a built-in wombo combo, being the Piccolo Jr. Giant Force, whereas Tapion has to just do it the old-fashioned way. So if your opponent's able to floodgate you and just slow you down, Tapion can't do as much. This deck really does well in the floodgates because you're not doing a lot of attacks and almost all of your damage is critical. So keep that in mind.